how it actually happens. That's what I'm interested in. I want to know, how does each of us in our own lives, with our own pain and our own challenges and our own joys and our own gifts, do work in the world that matters personally. Can you hear me okay? Okay, good. That matters personally, that matters in terms of the whole. Yeah. So I was really struck by this tension between the opposites, between this, I smell my fear and I move towards it. I really love that. And I feel the truth in it, and I can't run myself into the ground, or I'm really not of use. So I would love to hear both of you, whoever wants to start, talk a little bit about that. How inside of yourself do you feel those things and navigate that world?
It's a big question. I guess, what I would offer is that I grew up with a mom who I perceived as being selfish because she reached a point as a mother where she just kind of said, I've put myself last long enough. And so when I was an adolescent, she basically said, I have to take care of my own path and my own spiritual life. I've done this enough. And she kind of turned away from our family to take care of herself, which you can imagine was not a popular move, right? I mean, it took me many years to actually begin to turn towards her again, and my brother a lot longer than that. And so I grew up thinking service is good, self is not so good, and as a woman, she became my negative role model, so I was like, okay, I'm going to serve everybody else's needs. And then I began to realize that it wasn't just me doing this, that actually most of the women I was encountering had this kind of program, that whether it's actually spoken or not, we get chops for showing up for everybody else's needs. And I realized as I was in therapy that I could walk into a room and I could tell where everyone in the room was at, but I couldn't tell you where I was at, right? My radar was all about reading the room and reading other people. And so I actually spent years learning how to turn up my inner volume on myself so I could stay connected to myself while connecting to other people. And this thing that Nikki just described so beautifully about, when we're doing work in the world we care about so much, to actually put self-care first is so radical and hard. And I wrestle with it all the time. Mm-hmm. So I don't have any pat answers except to say it helps me to remember it and to remember that it's really in alignment with my own values to heal my relationship with myself so that I can be of service in healing relationships to each other and the earth and the world. Mm-hmm. And that one has to come first. Yeah. And I feel like it's something that we as a species are grappling with like crazy. Actually, not only women, but all of us. Yeah. That's what I would offer. What about you, Nikki? Yeah.
The menstrual cycle. Nina knows how much I love talking about the menstrual cycle. So one of the things I was able to do this year in putting myself first was actually be with my body in a much different way. And I've just been marveling at the gorgeousness of the menstrual cycle because the opposites of creation and destruction are right there. When I'm ovulating, I am on fire. I'm ripe. I'm just dripping with creativity. I'm wanting to take everyone and dance with them. It's just this beautiful overflowing pot of creation and light energy. And then the week or so before I start my cycle, I see everything that's wrong. I want to destroy everyone and everything around me. And I feel like I'm channeling the pits of hell itself through my body. And one thing that I've learned to really love and appreciate about both of those times is that creation and destruction are both necessary to build life. There is a way, if I'm more present and more intentional about being with myself in those times, that I don't have to be weirdo and violate people's boundaries in either time, when I'm ovulating or when I'm premenstrual. When I'm premenstrual, there's a safe way to say, I am seeing legitimately things that don't work right now. There are always things that need to be broken down into basic pieces so that they can be put back together the next cycle. So I think when it comes to integrating opposites, I'm looking at the wisdom of my body and the gift of then also having a bleeding time every month to then integrate the lesson, to take some time and be with the earth and bring creation and destruction together so that I know how to weave it the next time.
God, I wish I knew that when I had my period. You're so wise. And what I just wanted to add was that now that I don't have my period anymore, I've been discovering that postmenopausal time actually feels like a time to have myself, right? Like,
I'm so happy to hear that.
So I just wanted to like bookend that and go,
Totally.
like there's this amazing gift that we don't talk about enough, right? That's like, oh, okay, I had that and now this is something very different. And it actually feels like Mother Life giving me permission to have myself. Which I love.
Yeah, and actually, so just one extra, I'm so sorry.
Please. I don't want to say anything if I don't
I've
have
been
to.
looking at my mom and the elder women in my family, and one thing that's been hitting me a lot about post-menstrual cycle women is that I'm in a practice of having to be in very specific places in sequence, and when that stops, it's the integration and the ability to move between them at will. Right, because you've had 30 plus years of practice being in that cycle, and the way our society doesn't create a place for that for women, like the wisdom of what it is to actually be able to morph and shift, like on a dime, because you've had an entire lifetime of practice in the different states. Every spiritual practice has that place where you apprentice for decades before gaining mastery over something, and older women have mastery.
Yes.
And we don't ask them for their teachings. And it saddens me. So I want to ask for those teachings and be listening to them.
It makes me think about when the three of us were talking about today, which was awesome. One of the things we were talking about was about trusting in the flow and in the process, and not necessarily knowing where you're going, which is a little bit, it's similar to this conversation of how do you listen on the inside for what you need in order to navigate. So I would be curious for both of you what that's been like since you've both been in worlds where you had to have goals and strategic plans, and to move to a place where you're doing your work more in flow and in process.
It is so messed up and so desperately in need of reinvention, just like the business world is, and just like our governance is, and our health world. And so like every system is completely like in a process of dramatic death and rebirth. So, I mean, one of my phrases that keeps helping me, I think because I've been doing a lot of reading and learning about women of other backgrounds' experience and what it means to, like this question about decolonizing our minds and our inner selves. Like I realize you know, I'm accustomed to, from culture and from my life, I'm accustomed to getting my cues from the outer world and to seeing what works and then doing more of that and to, you know, listening outwardly and responding to that. And so I find that I'm like having to really recalibrate everything on a really deep level to listen not only to my heart, to listen with my spirit, and in a sense, maybe first and foremost, to stay connected to my body. Because I'm noticing that in order to function and excel in a masculinized world, I wound up leaving my body behind a lot. And it's kind of like, you know, I feel up here so aware about the menstrual cycles and this fabulous doctor. And I'm like, yeah, the body is, you know, one of the great things I learned from my mother actually was that our bodies never lie. And that actually in a world where there's so much deceit and so much deception, if we can stay connected to our bodies, it's one of the best sources of truth we have.
Amen.
Hey, women.
Hey, women.
Well. This is a very complex inquiry for me right now.
Yeah.
What it brings up is flow. How to know when I'm in flow? How do I know when I'm in flow? What cues do I use to say to myself, I'm in flow, or I need to shift something to get more in flow? What does that even look like? And what comes to mind is that my executive coach right now was married to a man who was a guru in the Himalayan sage tradition who also consulted with the World Bank. And when I heard that, I was really confused and intrigued, because this thing about light and dark being the same thing sometimes, I'm finding that everywhere, right? Like the nonprofit industrial complex, all of that shadow is right next to all of the things we know about it, which are good, and the light side, and the wonderful intentions and the wonderful execution. And so part of, I think, my inquiry about flow right now and the way that I'm working this year as an experiment is just to do that radical inquiry with myself about my own sovereignty. Because the thing that was impacting me and getting me out of flow before was I would allow things inside my boundary that probably shouldn't have been there. But the more I can be very clear about what is in this world and what is out there, and have it be a permeable membrane, but be very clear about what comes in and what goes out, the more I can tolerate very different types of things in my world. And the more in flow I can be, because the more clear and honest I can be in my voice. I can do the work of not silencing myself because I'm taking too much in. And that for me has been the flow, is getting much, much clearer with my voice. And if I notice that I'm saying no over and over and over and over again in a particular situation, let's just take stock of what that means. I don't have to have any value judgments about that. It's just we may not be in the same flow right now.
Right.
And to be in our separate flows in the chains that need to be connected, let's take some space.
Yeah. There's one other way that I realize that I'm referring to for myself about when I'm on track or on the path or not, and it's that I aspire to be the same person in my business life and in my personal life and in my inner life and in my spiritual life. Like one of my benchmarks for myself is congruence.
Yes.
And when I notice that there's, like when I started this work, which was probably not till I was in my 30s or even 40s, you know, I was one person at work and I was another person at home, and I was a different person when I was playing, and I was yet another person, you know, with my women friends and with my husband, and it was like all these fractals of Nina. And I thought, God, what an exhausting way to live. and that's so not who I want to be. So how do I pay exquisite attention to, if part of me is like not aligned, I want to bring that back, and how can I be the same one?
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So we are going to stay here, and all of you are going to get to have a conversation with each other.